a young man named Adebayo, came from a small village nestled in the heart of the savannah. The village of Iyanu was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the rhythms of life were dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. Adebayo had grown up surrounded by the love of his family and the warmth of his community, but he had always felt a yearning for something more. From a young age, Adebayo would climb the tallest baobab tree on the outskirts of the village. From there, he could see the faint outline of the city on the horizon, its skyscrapers piercing the sky like the tusks of a mighty elephant. He would sit there for hours, dreaming of the life that awaited him beyond the dusty roads and thatched roofs of Iyanu. Adebayo's father, a respected elder in the village, had always discouraged his son's fascination with the city. "The city is a place of broken promises and lost souls," he would say, his voice heavy with the wisdom of years. "It will chew you up and spit you out, my son. Stay here, where you are loved and needed." But Adebayo could not silence the call of his heart. On the night of his 21st birthday, with nothing but a small bag of belongings and the few coins he had saved over the years, he slipped away from the village. The weight of his decision sat heavy in his chest as he looked back one last time at the flickering fires of Iyanu, knowing that he might never see his home again. The journey to the city took 3 days. Adebayo hitched rides on creaking trucks and walked for miles under the scorching sun. By the time he reached the outskirts of the metropolis, his feet were blistered, and his throat was parched with thirst. But as he gazed up at the towering buildings that seemed to touch the very clouds, a thrill of excitement coursed through his veins. This was it. This was the beginning of his new life. The city assaulted Adebayo's senses from the moment he set foot on its bustling streets. The cacophony of car horns and shouting vendors was a far cry from the gentle sounds of the savannah. The air was thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and street food, a pungent mixture that made Adebayo's head spin. People rushed past him, their faces set in grim determination as they hurried to unknown destinations. Adebayo felt like a small fish swept up in a powerful current, unsure of where he was being carried. As the day wore on, the excitement that had buoyed Adebayo's spirits began to fade, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. He had arrived in the city with big dreams, but now the reality of his situation was setting in. He had no job, no place to stay, and only a handful of coins jingling in his pocket. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows between the buildings, when Adebayo realized he needed to find shelter for the night. He wandered the streets, his eyes darting from one building to another, searching for a sign that might offer hope. It was then that he saw her, an old woman struggling with a heavy basket of vegetables. Without thinking, Adebayo rushed to her aid, steadying the basket before it could topple from her gnarled hands. "Thank you, young man," the woman said, her face creasing into a smile that revealed a mouth with more gaps than teeth. "It's not often you find kindness in this city." Adebayo helped her carry the basket to her small vegetable stand on the corner of the street. As they walked, he found himself pouring out his story to her. How he had come to the city with dreams of a better life, but now found himself lost and alone. The old woman listened patiently, nodding her head in understanding. When Adebayo finished, she reached out and patted his hand. "You remind me of my grandson," she said, her eyes misting over with memory. "He, too, came to the city with big dreams. Now he works in one of those big buildings, but he never forgets where he came from." She pointed down the street to a rundown building with a faded sign that read, "Mama Neka's Boarding House." "Go there," she said. "Tell Mama Neka that Grandma Amina sent you. She might have a room for you, at least for a night or two." Gratitude welled up in Adebayo's chest. He thanked the old woman profusely, promising to return the next day to help her with her stand. As he turned to leave, she pressed a ripe mango into his hand. "For strength," she said with a wink. With renewed hope, Adebayo made his way to the boarding house. The building was a far cry from the gleaming skyscrapers he had dreamed about, but at that moment it looked like a palace to his tired eyes. Mama Neka, a large woman with a booming voice and hands that looked like they could crush stones, eyed Adebayo suspiciously when he mentioned Grandma Amina's name. But after a moment, her face softened. "Any friend of Amina's is welcome here," she said. "But listen well, boy. I can give you a room for a week. After that, you pay or you leave. This is the city, not a charity house." Adebayo nodded eagerly, relief flooding through him. He followed Mama Neka up a creaking staircase to a small room on the third floor. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a wobbly table, and a chair that looked like it might collapse at any moment. But, to Adebayo, it was perfect. As he lay down on the thin mattress that night, his mind raced with thoughts of what the coming days might bring. He had found shelter for a week, but what would happen after that? How would he find work? How would he navigate this vast, bewildering city? But as sleep began to claim him, Adebayo held on to hope. He had made it this far. Surely this was just the beginning of his adventure. With that thought, he drifted off into a restless sleep, the sounds of the city serving as a constant reminder of the world he had stepped into, a world of opportunity and danger, of dreams and nightmares. Little did Adebayo know that the next 10 days would test him in ways he could never have imagined. The city had opened its arms to him, but its embrace could be as cruel as it was kind. His journey had only just begun. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the grimy window of Adebayo's tiny room, he awoke with a start. For a moment he was disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds and smells of the city flooding his senses. Then reality set in. He was here, in the big city, and today was the day he would begin to make his dreams come true. Adebayo dressed quickly in his cleanest shirt and trousers, determined to make a good impression. He had no idea where to start looking for work, but he was certain that opportunities must be everywhere in a place this big. As he made his way down the creaky stairs of the boarding house, the smell of cooking hit him, making his stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since the mango Grandma Amina had given him the night before. In the small common area on the ground floor, he found Mama Neka stirring a large pot of what smelled like spicy beans. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a worn wooden table. "Can't have you fainting on the streets on your first day." Grateful and a little intimidated, Adebayo sat. Mama Neka placed a steaming bowl of beans and a chunk of bread in front of him. As he ate, she studied him with sharp eyes. "So, boy," she said, "what's your plan?" Adebayo swallowed hard. I'm going to find work," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Mama Neka snorted. "Just like that, eh? Listen, this city, it's not like your village. You can't just walk up to someone and ask for a job. You need skills, connections, or both." Adebayo's heart sank. He had neither. Seeing his crestfallen expression, Mama Neka's face softened slightly. "Start at the market," she advised. "Sometimes the vendors need help. It's not much, but it's a start. And keep your wits about you. This city has teeth, and it bites the unwary." With those ominous words ringing in his ears, Adebayo set out into the bustling streets. The market Mama Neka had mentioned wasn't hard to find. He just followed the growing crowd and the increasing volume of shouts and haggling. The market was a riot of color, sound, and smell. Stalls overflowed with fruits and vegetables. Others displayed intricate fabrics or gleaming pots and pans. The air was thick with the aroma of spices and grilled meats. For hours, Adebayo went from stall to stall, offering his help, but at each one, he was turned away. "No work," they'd say, or "come back next week," or sometimes they'd just shake their heads without a word. By midday, Adebayo's spirits were low. He found himself back at Grandma Amina's vegetable stand, where he had promised to help. The old woman's face lit up when she saw him. "Ah, my strong young man returns," she said warmly. "How goes your search?" Adebayo couldn't bring himself to lie. "Not well," he admitted. "No one needs help." Grandma Amina clucked sympathetically. "The city can be hard," she said, "but don't lose hope. Here, help me with these crates. I can't pay you much, but it's something." Grateful for any work, Adebayo spent the afternoon helping Grandma Amina. As he arranged vegetables and carried heavy crates, he kept his ears open, hoping to overhear news of job opportunities. It was nearing sunset when he heard something that made his heart race. Two men were talking as they passed by the stall. "New construction site on Broad Street," one was saying. "They're always looking for strong lads there." Adebayo's eyes widened. This could be his chance. He turned to thank Grandma Amina and say goodbye, but as he did, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of rough-looking young men had surrounded a stall a few meters away. The stall owner, an elderly man, was arguing with them, his voice rising in panic. "Please," the old man was saying, "I've already paid this week." One of the young men, tall and scarred, leaned in menacingly. "Prices have gone up, old man. Pay up or we'll make sure you can't sell here anymore." Adebayo felt a surge of anger. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Leave him alone," he shouted. The group turned to look at him, surprise turning quickly to amusement. The scarred man sauntered over, sizing Adebayo up. "Well, well," he sneered. "Looks like we have a hero. You're new here, aren't you, village boy? Let me give you some advice. Mind your own business if you want to survive in this city." Adebayo stood his ground, though his heart was pounding. "Bullying old men. Is that how real city people behave?" he challenged. The man's eyes narrowed dangerously. For a moment, Adebayo thought he was going to be struck, but then, unexpectedly, the man laughed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. He turned to his group. "Come on, boys. We'll deal with this later." As they swaggered away, Adebayo let out a shaky breath. The old man he had defended hurried over, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, young man," he said, gripping Adebayo's hand. Not many would have the courage to stand up to Razor and his gang. "Razor?" Adebayo asked, the name sending a chill down his spine. The old man nodded grimly. "They control this part of the market. Demand protection money from us vendors. It's best to stay clear of them." As Adebayo made his way back to the boarding house that evening, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had stood up to city thugs, but hadn't found steady work. He had made friends, but also, it seemed, dangerous enemies. Lying in his small room that night, Adebayo realized that surviving in the city was going to be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. But as he drifted off to sleep, one thought kept him going. Somewhere in this vast, unforgiving city, there was a place for him. He just had to find it. Little did Adebayo know that his confrontation with Razor would have consequences that would ripple through the coming days, setting in motion a chain of events that would test his courage, his loyalty, and his very understanding of right and wrong in this new world he had entered. As dawn broke on the third day, Adebayo woke with a sense of determination. The events of the previous day had shaken him, but they had also ignited a fire within. He was no longer just a village boy in the big city. He was someone who had stood up for what was right. With renewed purpose, Adebayo set out early, heading towards Broad Street where he had heard about the construction site. The morning air was crisp, and the streets were already alive with vendors setting up their stalls and early commuters rushing to work. As he walked, Adebayo couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every now and then, he'd catch a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd, only for it to disappear when he looked again. Was Razor's gang following him? The thought made his palms sweat, but he pressed on. After an hour of walking, Adebayo finally reached the construction site. It was a hive of activity, with workers swarming over the skeleton of what would become a towering office building. He approached a man who seemed to be in charge, his hard hat marking him out from the others. "Excuse me, sir," Adebayo said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I heard you might need workers here. I'm strong and I learn quickly." The foreman looked him up and down, his expression unreadable. "Where are you from, boy?" "A new village, sir," Adebayo replied honestly. The foreman's face softened slightly. "I remember my first days in the city," he said. "It's not easy. All right, we'll give you a try. But listen, this is dangerous work. One mistake and you could get hurt or killed. You understand?" Adebayo nodded eagerly. "I understand, sir. Thank you. I won't let you down." For the next few hours, Adebayo worked harder than he ever had in his life. He carried heavy loads of bricks, mixed cement, and climbed scaffolding that made his head spin when he looked down. The work was grueling, but Adebayo felt a sense of pride with every task he completed. As the sun reached its zenith, the workers broke for lunch. Adebayo sat apart from the others, too shy to join their conversations. He was just biting into the bread roll he had bought with his meager savings when a shadow fell across him. Looking up, he found himself face to face with Razor, the gang leader from the market. Adebayo's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Well, well," Razor said, his voice deceptively friendly. "Look who's trying to make an honest living. I'm impressed, village boy." Adebayo stood slowly, aware that several of Razor's gang members had appeared, surrounding them. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Razor's smile turned predatory. "Just came to give you a friendly warning. You see this construction site? It's on our turf, and anyone who works here, well, they need to pay for protection. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to happen to you." Adebayo felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood his ground. "I don't have any money to give you," he said firmly. Razor's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe you should reconsider working here. This city can be very dangerous for those who don't know the rules." Before Adebayo could respond, a booming voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" It was the foreman, striding towards them with a group of workers at his back. Razor's demeanor changed instantly, his threatening aura replaced by an affable smile. "No problem at all," he said smoothly. "Just welcoming the new guy to the neighborhood." With a final, meaningful look at Adebayo, Razor and his gang melted away into the crowd. The foreman turned to Adebayo, concern etched on his weathered face. "You okay, son? Those men giving you trouble?" Adebayo hesitated, torn between telling the truth and not wanting to cause problems on his first day. "It's nothing I can't handle," he said finally. The foreman didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "All right." But listen, if they come around again, you let me know. We look out for our own here." As Adebayo returned to work that afternoon, his mind was in turmoil. He had found a job, but at what cost? The threat of Razor and his gang loomed over him like a dark cloud. That evening, as he made his way back to the boarding house, Adebayo took a detour to the market. He found Grandma Amina closing up her stall and helped her pack away the remaining vegetables. "Ah, my brave young man," she said warmly. "How goes your adventure in the city?" Adebayo hesitated, then found himself pouring out the whole story. The job at the construction site, Razor's threats, his fears for what might come next. Grandma Amina listened patiently, her eyes filled with understanding and concern. When Adebayo finished, she placed a gnarled hand on his arm. "The city is like a great river, my child," she said softly. "It can sweep you away if you're not careful. But remember, even in the fiercest currents, there are always rocks to hold on to. You're not alone here." Her words comforted Adebayo, but as he lay in his small room that night, sleep eluded him. He had come to the city to find a better life, but now he found himself caught between the promise of honest work and the threats of those who preyed on the vulnerable. As he tossed and turned, Adebayo realized that the coming days would require more than just hard work. He would need courage, wisdom, and perhaps a bit of the luck that had seen him through so far. Little did he know that the next day would bring a twist of fate that would change the course of his city adventure in ways he could never have imagined. As the fourth day dawned, Adebayo rose early, his body aching from the previous day's labor, but his spirit resolute. He had made a decision during the sleepless night. He would not be intimidated by Razor and his gang. This was his chance at a better life, and he was determined to seize it. The construction site was already bustling when he arrived. Adebayo threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, earning approving nods from the foreman and his fellow workers. As the morning wore on, he began to feel a sense of belonging, a part of something bigger than himself. It was just before the lunch break when it happened. Adebayo was high up on the scaffolding, passing bricks to a worker above him, when he heard a sudden crack. Time seemed to slow as he watched in horror as the scaffolding began to collapse. Without thinking, Adebayo reached out and grabbed the worker above him, a man named Chidi, pulling him to safety on a stable part of the structure. They clung to the metal frame as the section they had been standing on moments before crashed to the ground below. Chaos erupted at the site. Workers rushed to help, and soon Adebayo and Chidi were safely back on solid ground. The foreman ran over, his face a mix of relief and anger. "What happened?" he demanded. Chidi, still shaken, spoke up. "The bolts. They were loose. If Adebayo hadn't reacted so quickly." The foreman's face darkened. He turned to Adebayo. "You may have saved more than one life today, son. Thank you." As the dust settled and work slowly resumed, Adebayo couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Loose bolts on scaffolding didn't just happen. Could this be connected to Razor's threats? His suspicions were confirmed when, during the lunch break, he overheard two workers talking in hushed tones. "Saw some guys messing with the scaffolding last night. Thought they were part of the night shift, but now I'm not so sure." Adebayo's heart raced. He had to do something. But what? If he spoke up, would anyone believe him? And if they did, what would Razor do next? As he grappled with this dilemma, he noticed a commotion at the site entrance. A sleek car had pulled up, and a well-dressed man stepped out, flanked by what looked like bodyguards. The foreman rushed to greet him, and Adebayo heard murmurs ripple through the workers. "It's the big boss, the owner himself." Curiosity got the better of Adebayo, and he edged closer to listen. "Why cannot have accidents like this, Johnson?" the well-dressed man was saying to the foreman. The reputation of Olawale Construction is at stake. I want to know exactly what happened. Adebayo felt a surge of courage. Before he could second-guess himself, he stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I think I might know something about what happened." All eyes turned to him. The owner, a man with graying hair and piercing eyes, looked at him curiously. "And you are?" "Adebayo, sir. I'm new here. But yesterday I was threatened by a gang. They said I needed to pay for protection. And today the scaffolding—" He told them everything. About Razor, the threats, and what he had overheard about people tampering with the equipment. As he spoke, he saw the owner's expression change from skepticism to concern to anger. When Adebayo finished, there was a moment of tense silence. Then the owner turned to the foreman. "Johnson, get me the police, now." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Police arrived, statements were taken, and extra security was posted around the site. Adebayo found himself recounting his story multiple times, each telling making him feel both braver and more terrified of the potential consequences. As the workday came to an end, the owner approached Adebayo. "Young man," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "you've shown remarkable courage today. Not many would have spoken up as you did." Adebayo nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow," the owner continued. "I think we need to have a longer conversation about what's been happening here." As Adebayo made his way back to the boarding house that evening, his mind was reeling. He had come to the city looking for opportunity, and now he found himself in the middle of what seemed like a battle between legitimate business and criminal elements. He stopped by the market to check on Grandma Amina, half expecting to find Razor and his gang waiting for him. But the market was peaceful, the old woman smiling warmly as she saw him approach. "Ah, my brave one," she said, patting his cheek. "I can see in your eyes that much has happened today. Come, sit with me a while." As Adebayo helped her close up her stall, he poured out the day's events. Grandma Amina listened intently, her wise eyes never leaving his face. "You have stepped into the current of this city's life now, my child," she said when he had finished. "But remember, even as it pulls you along, you must choose your own path. The easy way is not always the right way." That night, as Adebayo lay in his bed at the boarding house, he felt a mix of emotions he had never experienced before. Fear of what Razor might do next, pride in having stood up for what was right, and a nervous anticipation about his meeting with the owner tomorrow. As he drifted off to sleep, Adebayo realized that in just 4 days, the city had changed him. He was no longer the naive village boy who had arrived with nothing but dreams. He was becoming something more, a man who could shape his own destiny. Little did he know that the next day would bring revelations that would shake the very foundations of his new life in the city, testing his newfound courage in ways he could never have imagined. As the 5th day dawned, Adebayo woke with a mixture of anticipation and dread churning in his stomach. He dressed in his best clothes, which, admittedly, weren't much, and set out for the construction company's main office. The building was a towering glass structure that seemed to touch the sky. Adebayo felt small and out of place as he entered the pristine lobby. A receptionist eyed him suspiciously until he mentioned his appointment with Mr. Olawale, the owner. After a nerve-wracking elevator ride to the top floor, Adebayo found himself ushered into a spacious office with a breathtaking view of the city. Mr. Olawale sat behind a massive desk, his piercing gaze fixed on Adebayo. "Sit down, young man," he said, gesturing to a chair. "We have much to discuss." For the next hour, Adebayo recounted everything that had happened since his arrival in the city. Mr. Olawale listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions. When Adebayo finished, the older man leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Adebayo," he said finally, "what you've told me is deeply troubling. It seems this gang has been operating unchecked for some time. But your courage in speaking up has given us a chance to put an end to it." Adebayo felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly tempered by Mr. Olawale's next words. "However, this puts you in a dangerous position. Razor and his gang won't take kindly to your interference." Adebayo's heart sank. Was he about to lose his job? Would he have to leave the city? But Mr. Olawale surprised him. "I have a proposition for you. We need someone on the inside, someone who can help us gather evidence against this gang, someone they won't suspect. Are you willing to help us, Adebayo?" The proposal stunned Adebayo. This was far more than he had bargained for when he came to the city. It was dangerous, certainly, but it was also a chance to make a real difference. I'll do it," Adebayo said, his voice steadier than he felt. Mr. Olawale nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll set you up with a new job, a security guard at one of our smaller sites. It's the perfect cover for you to observe and report on the gang's activities." As Adebayo left the office, his head was spinning. In less than a week, he had gone from a simple village boy to an undercover informant. The weight of his new responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. That evening, as he walked through the market, lost in thought, a hand grabbed his arm, pulling him into a shadowy alley. Adebayo's heart raced as he found himself face to face with Razor. "Well, well," Razor sneered, "if it isn't the little hero. Heard you've been talking to the big boss." "That's not very smart, village boy." Adebayo struggled to keep his composure, remembering his new role. I was just trying to keep my job," he stammered, hoping to sound convincingly scared. Razor studied him for a moment, then his face split into a cruel grin. "Maybe you're not as dumb as you look. Tell you what, you keep your eyes and ears open at that construction site. Let us know about any opportunities. Do that and maybe we'll let you stick around. Understand?" Adebayo nodded frantically, his act apparently convincing Razor. As the gang leader sauntered away, Adebayo leaned against the alley wall, his heart pounding. He had just taken his first step into a dangerous double life. Over the next few days, Adebayo settled into his new role as a security guard. By day, he patrolled the construction site, keeping a watchful eye out for any suspicious activity. By night, he met secretly with Mr. Olawale's trusted associates, sharing what he had learned. It was a precarious balance. Adebayo had to appear cooperative enough to gain Razor's trust, while gathering evidence that could bring down the gang. Every conversation was a delicate dance, every piece of information a potential landmine. As the days passed, Adebayo found himself changing. The naive village boy was fading away, replaced by someone sharper, more cautious. He learned to read people, to see beyond their words to their true intentions. But the double life was taking its toll. Adebayo found it harder to sleep, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over his shoulder. The only moments of peace came when he visited Grandma Amina's stall in the market. On the 10th day, as Adebayo helped Grandma Amina sort through her vegetables, she fixed him with a knowing look. "My child," she said softly, "I can see the weight you carry. Remember, even the strongest tree bends in the storm. It's okay to seek shelter sometimes." Adebayo felt tears prick at his eyes. For the first time since this all began, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his fear and uncertainty. As he left the market that evening, a plan forming in his mind, Adebayo didn't notice the shadowy figure watching him from across the street. Someone who had seen his moment of vulnerability with Grandma Amina. Someone who was about to change the game entirely. Little did Adebayo know that as he entered the final day of his incredible 11-day journey, everything was about to come to a head in a way he could never have anticipated. The city had tested him, changed him, and now it would demand a final, fateful choice. As the 11th day dawned, Adebayo woke with a sense of foreboding. The weight of his double life had become almost unbearable, and he knew something had to change. He had made a decision during the night. He would go to Mr. Olawale today and tell him everything, including his interactions with Razor. It was time to end this dangerous game. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Adebayo left the boarding house, a young boy ran up to him, thrust a crumpled note into his hand, and disappeared into the crowded street. With trembling fingers, Adebayo unfolded the paper. The message was brief and chilling. "We have the old woman. Come to the abandoned warehouse on Dock Street at noon. Come alone, or she dies." Adebayo's blood ran cold. Grandma Amina. They had Grandma Amina. In that moment, all his carefully laid plans crumbled to dust. He couldn't go to Mr. Olawale or the police, not with Grandma Amina's life at stake. With a heavy heart and racing mind, Adebayo made his way to Dock Street. The abandoned warehouse loomed before him, a hulking shadow against the midday sun. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The interior was dim and dusty, shafts of light streaming through broken windows. In the center of the vast space stood Razor, flanked by his gang members, and there, tied to a chair, was Grandma Amina. Relief flooded Adebayo as he saw she was unharmed, but her eyes were wide with fear. "Ah, the village boy arrives," Razor sneered. "Right on time." "Let her go," Adebayo said, trying to keep his voice steady. "She has nothing to do with this." Razor laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Oh, but she does. You see, we've been watching you, Adebayo. Your little chats with the old woman, your secret meetings with Olawale's men. Did you really think you could play both sides and get away with it?" Adebayo's mind raced. How much did they know? How long had they been watching him? "Here's how this is going to work," Razor continued. "You're going to call Olawale right now. Tell him you have information about a big shipment coming in tonight. When he and his men show up, we'll be waiting. With them out of the way, this city will be ours." "And if I refuse?" Adebayo asked, though he already knew the answer. Razor's eyes hardened. "Then the old woman dies, and you'll follow soon after." Time seemed to stand still as Adebayo weighed his options. He could make the call, potentially sacrificing Mr. Olawale and his men, but saving Grandma Amina and himself. Or he could refuse, likely costing both their lives, but protecting those who had trusted him. As he stood there, torn between impossible choices, Adebayo's gaze met Grandma Amina's. In her eyes, he saw not fear, but a quiet strength. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod. And in that moment, Adebayo knew what he had to do. "No," he said, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "I won't make the call." Razor's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand, a signal to his men, but before he could bring it down, chaos erupted. The warehouse doors burst open, and police officers swarmed in, led by none other than Mr. Olawale himself. In the ensuing confusion, Adebayo rushed to Grandma Amina, quickly untying her bonds. As the police subdued Razor and his gang, Mr. Olawale approached Adebayo, a mixture of concern and admiration on his face. "How did you know?" Adebayo asked, still in shock. Mr. Olawale smiled. We've been keeping a close eye on you, son. When we saw you receive that note this morning, we knew something was wrong. I'm sorry we couldn't intervene sooner, but we needed to catch them red-handed." As the police led Razor away, the gang leader fixed Adebayo with a vengeful glare. "This isn't over, village boy," he spat. "You'll regret this." But Adebayo stood tall, unafraid. He had faced his greatest test and emerged stronger. In the days that followed, the city buzzed with the news of Razor's gang's downfall. Adebayo found himself hailed as a hero, but the praise felt hollow compared to the quiet pride he saw in Grandma Amina's eyes. Mr. Olawale, true to his word, offered Adebayo a permanent position in his company, not as a laborer or a security guard, but as part of a new community outreach program aimed at helping other young people find honest work and avoid the lure of gangs. As Adebayo stood on the balcony of his new apartment looking out over the city he had come to call home, he marveled at how much had changed in just 11 days. He had arrived a naive village boy, full of dreams but unsure of his place in the world. Now, he stood as a man who had faced fear, made difficult choices, and emerged stronger for it. The city stretched out before him, a landscape of challenges and opportunities. But now, Adebayo knew he was ready to face whatever came his way. He had found not just a job or a home, but a purpose. As the sun set on the 11th day, casting a golden glow over the city, Adebayo smiled. His journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now, he faced the future not with fear, but with hope and determination. For in 11 days, Adebayo had not just survived the city. He had learned to thrive in it. And in doing so, he had found the better life he had always dreamed of. One built not on fleeting success, but on courage, integrity, and the strength of the connections he had forged. The city had tested him, changed him, and ultimately it had become his home. And Adebayo was ready for whatever adventure came next.